Okay, so we got about a dozen or so people online or on the telephone from around the world, and you're kind enough to come in person. And unlike satsang, this is not interactive, it's just discourse, which is distinct from the other things we do because everything else we do, we don't just invite your response and your participation and your words and everything. We very much want it. We encourage it. This is the first time we're doing anything where it's just a one-way street. And we'll see how that feels, whether that's valuable or needs to change somehow. But part of it has to do with my sense that I'm not going to get the luxury of silence, that the work will have to continue through the format of teaching, through the format of words, through the format of saying and explaining and talking, instead of purely through transmitting, purely through being together. I don't get the sense that I'm going to get the luxury of being able to be a purely darshan guru, just someone who transmits Shaktipat and is able to be in silence, because the words really, really aren't what it's about. It's helpful. There's an aspect that's about a teaching, but this is not about a teaching. And there's no true teacher who is concerned with the teaching being the point of the whole thing. Obviously, it's not the point. Osho got the luxury of being able to be in silence for a number of years. I don't think I'm going to be as lucky. I just don't see it in the cards. There's too much that has to be done. There's too much that has to be talked about. And I'm not going to be here forever. And it'll have to be however it works out. So remember that the guru is never a person, the guru is a function. There's two there. The guru is a human being. That's the person part. That's the same as everybody else. And then there's the guru function, which is a divine function that is not coming from the person. And the function is going to do whatever it's going to do, and I don't get a vote. But sometimes I can sense or I can see some directions, and I certainly see the direction that working through the medium of silence is not going to be possible in the years I have left. Maybe if I'd started younger, but that wasn't up to me. But that's fine. I'm a good talker. What is going to change, what already has changed, is the Shaktipat aspect. That is going to be a much bigger part of the work, because the guru function itself is requiring it. So understand that that could have happened 10 years ago. Nothing dramatic has changed in terms of the aspect of divine transmission. Divine transmission is literally the definition of the guru function. So anybody who is in that position for real is experiencing or is a vehicle for that activity. So it's not like it wasn't happening 10 years ago, but it's very different to do, let's say, the right way to say it is this way, to offer Shaktipat to people as a blessing occasion. And for whatever reason, the guru function is absolutely going in that direction, which isn't really my style. I've done it a few times. It's come up naturally in satsang. I've done it a few times. But it's going to be a formal part of what we do in the future, which I find a little bit bizarre, but it's fun, that's for sure. So the form is changing, but the essence will never change. The essence has never changed throughout time. The essence isn't going to change throughout time, because the essence has to do with what has nothing to do with time, what has nothing to do with anything we recognize as comprehensible. And this is what is just so difficult for people. This is just what makes it seem so unattainable, this whole thing of really reaching the divine for real. What makes it feel and seem so unattainable is the fact that you actually do have to transcend. You actually cannot reach the real divine. You can only reach the human aspect of the divine, which I refer to as the imaginary divine, under normal conditions. So the transcendent part is very, very confusing to people. And that's completely understandable. How could it not be? It's the opposite of everything we do. It's the opposite of everything we know. It's the opposite of everything we're taught. It's the opposite of how we think. It's the opposite of how we experience. Because as soon as you say beyond experience, that's where you lose us humans. And we're absolutely conditioned to believe that the nature of that experience itself is the definition of the nature of things. That the nature of reality and the term experience or experienceable are synonymous. And they're not. This is a fine point, but the significance can't be overestimated. So you will not experience anything real of cosmic consciousness ever as an experience. You will experience it not as an experience. You will know it. You'll approach it and feel it to be an experience, but you'll know on a way deeper level, you will know for sure that this is not an experience. It's more like a stumbling over something, more like a falling into something, more like a tuning to something that was already vibrating, but you didn't notice. But to have the idea that where you're trying to go and what you're trying to get to is an experience or an event or a point in time or a progression or set of conditions is all very misleading, and that's the idea that we have. So as quickly as possible at this juncture, I'm trying to get you to drop all these very, very fixed notions that it's next to impossible to really drop, because it's how our mind is taught to work. You can't really think beyond experience. You can't really emote beyond the feeling level. We're talking about something that can't be talked about. But it can be experienced, but only as something that is not what you or I would typically think of as an experience, until it has descended on you, until it's grabbed you somehow, until it's transported you, until it's done whatever the hell it's going to do with you, however it's going to come to you, however you're going to experience it. Until that has happened for real, it's very difficult to get the point that it is not an experience or an event. You are not going to become enlightened. It's not going to happen. You are not going to reach God. It isn't possible. You aren't going to know the truth, absolutely. In the form that those sentences suggest to our mind, that isn't going to happen. Enlightenment can happen. Going to the divine, going to God needs to happen. It's the only reason that you're here. Knowing truth absolutely for real is the best part of life and your true potential. But it won't be the way you have been taught and the way your mind works to think of it as a future event. It won't be like that. It cannot be related to anything that's come before, and everything has come before. That's all you know is what's come before. Until there's some real, actual beyondness, until you've been pulled into the beyond, even for a moment, in a way that is beyond experience, until you've had that happen to you. And it can happen like that, and it can never happen. And it can last for a half a second, and it can last for years. But until some type of, and I have to use the word because there is no other word that I can think of, some type of experiencing like that happens, which is not an experience, you will not really know what we're talking about. You'll not really know what you're after for real, what the taste of it is, because it is not related to anything else that's ever happened to you, that you've experienced, that you've thought, that you've felt, that you've been involved with. Because the simple fact of the matter is, this is a very good way to say it, the simple fact of the matter is, God is far greater than all that and far beyond all that. Whatever you've experienced doesn't come close to the actuality of what the direct experience of God really is. So you can only have your own idea, and everybody has their own idea. Even atheists have their own idea, but that has nothing to do with actual God, actual truth. So all conceptualizations, in the end up being barriers. Along the way, of course, you're going to need to have some kind of bearing, some kind of way of making sense of things. But you have to be prepared. You have to be ready. You have to know it ahead of time that when your time comes for real, when you are really going to be pulled off the ledge, that all conceptualizations will be useless. Whatever you thought and whatever you hoped for isn't going to happen, because reality doesn't conform to your hopes, wishes, and ideas. So this is very, very much the reason why it would be nice to not have to use words. It would be nice to not have to relay conceptually anything about the actuality of the spiritual nature of things, because any word that's used is immediately misleading. And you're listening with ears that are going to invariably instantly mislead, because you're going to connect it to whatever preconceived notion you have, which is connected to every other concept that you've ever been exposed to or thought. And you end up trying to think your way to God. You end up trying to figure out what truth is. And it's very difficult to give up that habit. And part of the guru's job is to help you in a way that's palatable to you, in a way you'll accept, to help you to give up the thought pattern habit that we all start with. And until that's fairly well accomplished, a lot of which has to do with, of course, deconditioning, until that's fairly well accomplished, you're going to continue to have expectations that themselves prevent you from seeing with your own eyes and hearing with your own ears. So this is tricky stuff. Now, Adida tried to get around it in his 35 years of being a very, very powerful spiritual master. He tried to get around it through having a very, very studious approach. He required his disciples to be studying all the time, studying every word he said, studying everything he taught, studying every lesson he gave and every method he gave and every practice he gave. And disciples of Adida spent really the preponderance of their time essentially in study, essentially equivalent to Bible class. So he tried to use you could say, the wisdom approach, the conceptual approach to get to the non-conceptual. And it didn't work. And he'd be the first to say that. In fact, he said it many times. And it's not that it doesn't inherently work, it's that people weren't able to go deep enough into it. We're all holding back always. So it's interesting that someone who has the immense consciousness of an Adida would use as his primary method essentially a scholastic approach. It's quite amazing. It's quite mind-boggling. Kind of study your way to truth, study your way to God. Now, he was intending it more as revelation work. He was intending it, obviously, as the study, just like Bible study for a very serious Christian, if you go deep into it, you will start to have some personal revelations. It will start to have a transformative effect on you. The words aren't just concepts. There's a power in the words. There's a divinity in the words if it's real. And that's what he was aiming for. But, you know, it happened to the degree that it happened. It's not that what he had people studying wasn't powerful enough. It's the most powerful written material there's ever been and ever will be in terms of the divine truth simply laid out in written form. So you can see the logic of it, of have people study that, but it didn't do the trick. And at a certain point, he also stopped speaking pretty much entirely and just concentrated on his writing. And when he had satsang with people or met with people, it was pretty much in silence. Osho used an entirely different method, more really an Advaita approach, although he never very often called it that. And instead of the head method, he focused on the heart method. And he certainly opened a lot of people's hearts. And he certainly made openings in the world like few others ever have. And he encouraged people to be joyful, to celebrate. And instead of Bible study, it was open yourself to everything that's here. Open yourself to God. Open yourself to truth. The revelation is in you. So you have to open to the degree that the revelation can occur to you. So he was more successful, certainly, and is more successful in terms of reaching more people and having a more powerful effect on more individuals than Adida was. But it's the same problem. No matter what approach anyone uses, there is no way to take people directly into the transcendent. Because as we are, we resist and refuse to go. It is possible, but it doesn't work with human beings. And every genuine spiritual master is trying to do exactly that, to get you to do as quickly as possible the impossible, to actually go. And recognizing at the same time that you are not going to comply easily, quickly, or readily, and that you have to kind of be brought along until you're willing, until you actually have had enough experience, enough of the transcendent has entered you, has become obvious to you, that your fear doesn't stop you anymore, that your resistance isn't running the whole show anymore, and that you are willing to take a bigger risk and not cling to the notion that life should never be hanging in the balance. At the real point of transcendence, you will always feel, and I'm talking about the real transcendence, when you really are being enveloped, when you really are being even dragged, kicking and screaming, when you're really going to God, when truth is really grabbing you, when reality is really being revealed. You will always have the feeling that this is very, very dangerous territory. It'll always feel to you like your life is on the line. Like the price here could be physical death. This could be my last few moments. It's impossible to transition into the true transcendent position without going through those terrifying feelings. It just can't be avoided. It's the way we're wired. It will feel like death. It will feel like the stakes are too high and you should watch out and maybe even turn back. So ICODA tried to deal with that natural human response that we all have educationally by giving people more opportunity for the wisdom to understand that it's not going to be as easy as we'd like. And yes, you're going to have to pay that price of feeling terrified when things get really real, when reality changes for you for real. And Osho tried to do it by helping people get in touch naturally with their natural joy, their natural ebullience, their natural happiness, ability to celebrate, realizing the gift of life, so that when those moments arrive, the person is so open-hearted, so willing that it just is accepted. I can go and be in fear and terror, and I can go anyway, and it's okay. But there's no optimum method. There isn't any secret to any of this. Jesus didn't have the ultimate answer. Buddha didn't have the ultimate answer. I don't have the ultimate answer. Osho doesn't have the ultimate answer. ICODA doesn't have the ultimate answer, because it's going to be absolutely up to you. It's going to be absolutely up to the individual what does or doesn't happen in what time frame, in what life situation, in what lifetime, in what realm. Nobody is going to drag you against your will. Nobody is going to throw you into some deep end of the pool that you're not willing to go to. Although it can feel like that. So you're not going to find God. It's never going to happen. When it does, it'll be more like God found you. That's how it'll seem to you. That's how it'll feel. You're not going to get enlightened. It's never going to happen. That conceptualization isn't how it works. But that does not mean that enlightenment will not arrive. It just won't arrive as what you think it is, and in the way you think it will or should. So you will be again and again surprised by how things shake out. Because again and again, it will not be what you thought it would be. You will not be who you thought you would become. And this is why Osho focused constantly on just drop everything. Just drop this, drop that. And why Adida focused all the time on just turn to me, just turn to the Guru, and forget the rest. And it's the same reason Jesus talked almost nonstop about the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God, it's inside you. It's all the same attempt to get us poor humans who are not familiar with what's truly beyond, to get us to be willing to have an entirely different experience that is not connected to who we are and what our life has been. And of course, initiation, discipleship is the beginning of that. It's kind of the gateway, makes the break between everything that's come before and what's to follow. So all of these ways are correct. And they take us as far as they take us based on our willingness and our readiness to accept something completely different and completely unknown. And all the Shaktipat experiences in the world aren't enough. All the fireworks and all the streamings and all the openings aren't enough, typically, to dislodge us from our very, very fixed position as this is who I am, and this is what's going on. And every genuine guru is constantly saying you're not who or what you think you are, and what you think is going on isn't what's going on. And you've had your own powerful experiences, no doubt, of exactly that, and even that has not been enough reason for you to absolutely give yourself up and surrender to the divine once and for all. So the guru doesn't cause you to surrender. God doesn't work on you and make you surrender. Life doesn't bring you to the brink of surrender. The good news and the bad news both. It's nothing I haven't said 100 times, but I'm saying it this way tonight. The good news and the bad news both is it's absolutely in your hands. It's absolutely up to you. Your receptiveness makes all the difference in the world. Your willingness makes all the difference in the world. And your openness makes all the difference in the world. But all of that is simply preparation. All of that is the ground, not the tree. All of that is the ground the tree grows in. It can't be explained. You can't explain it. I can't explain it, how the tree grows. You will never explain it, how you got to God. You will never be able to say it in any coherent way that actually gives the sense of it. Just like you can't say how you've gotten to wherever you've gotten so far. You have some fixed ideas about it, but they're wrong. It's more grace-filled and magical than you give it credit for. So if you can recognize that you can't account for what you have experienced so far and what you know of the divine so far, which is a lot, why would you think you'll be able to account for whatever is still ahead? That won't be any more definable than what's arrived already. You'll do the exact same thing. You'll have some ideas about it that will not represent the actuality. And the actual transcendence is triggered. Here's the point of everything I've been saying up until now. The actual transcendence is triggered only when the actuality is more powerful in you, for you, than any idea about it, explanation of it, evaluation of it, or even feeling sense of it. Is this computing? Because I'm being very highfalutin tonight. This is not how I usually speak. I'm giving you very, very subtle stuff that at some point has to be heard and comprehended so that you're prepared in the right way. So that when what can't be accounted for or explained happens to you, you understand immediately without any hesitation, aha, this is grace, this is the divine, this is a truth-based moment. This is not something has gone wrong. This is not I'm imagining something. Because the first reflexive response is to be anxious and to feel that something's gone amiss, something's gone wrong. Maybe I had a slight stroke or something, because I'm seeing bright light. But it won't be a stroke. If you have a stroke, that's another thing. It'll be more powerful than any physical experience, than any stroke. But you won't recognize it if you're not properly prepared. This is why ICODA focused so much on studying, because his idea was you need to be prepared for the grace that comes like lightning so that you will recognize what it's about and not turn away from it reflexively like we typically do. And why Osho taught again and again to accept everything so that when actual God is knocking on the door, you'll actually answer instead of pretend you're not home. And my approach has very much been to simply prepare you in every which way to allow it. So when the real moment comes, you will allow it rather than shrink from it. Because every single one of you has had the experience already. Every single one of you has had the experience. Everyone who's listening to me has had the experience of coming very, very close and then shutting down, either moving away from it because it was too intense or feeling like it's a kind of a death that can't be tolerated. I'm dissolving and it can't be a good thing. Something along those lines, or something completely different, but you get the point, I think, right? You've already had that experience, and some people many times. So you've got to be prepared. You've got to be readied. You've got to be helped to have a different response the next time it comes. You have to be helped, assisted to be okay with dissolving when the dissolution starts, so that you don't shut down exactly what brings exactly what you're wanting. That's the irony. It's always very ironic. The spiritual game is the most ironic game in town. It doesn't get any more ironic. We always are refusing exactly what we are devoting our lives to getting. What we want more than anything is what we always turn away from when it starts to arrive. That's the irony. Very human, very understandable, given the intensity, given the immensity, given the fact that it's the unknown itself, given the fact that we have no real preparation, nothing can prepare you for real. You can kind of prepare and be prepared and be assisted to be prepared as much as possible, but nothing prepares you for the ultimate. How can it? If God appears right in front of your nose suddenly, how are you going to be prepared for that? What prepares you for that? Nothing. You can be as prepared as you can be, but you can't be truly prepared. So I think it's good to tell you that you will not be transported on a cloud with angelic music in the background. It will be some type of ordeal, some type of wrenching through. Because anything worth attaining, why would we think that spirituality or going to God or finding truth is different than somehow everything else in life that we have to get there? It doesn't just fall in our lap. Some price has to be paid. There's some kind of wrenching or groping or giving up or moving toward that takes effort for everything that's worth having, everything that we've ever tried to get to or have or attain or experience or know or be part of. And the divine experience isn't any different in that sense. There's a price to be paid. I've been saying that since day one, that there's a price to be paid. And that's why we resist, because somehow we know that deep down. And we really don't want to pay the price. It's just how we are. It's not terrible. So that's the fulcrum, the turning point, is when you become willing to pay the price. That willingness starts the transformational process that takes you beyond the easily garnered spiritual into the actual unknown part, the part that's going to sweep you off your feet, the part that's going to change your definition of everything and change who and what you are. So the gentleman who spoke at the satsang in Santa Monica the other night came up to me after the meeting, and he said, well, I spoke about, you had this powerful effect on me, the Shaktipat, and 2 weeks ago when I came to the satsang the first time, and it's been affecting me all these 2 weeks, and my whole life has changed. And I spoke about it in the satsang. Those of you who were there, you heard him talk about it. He felt like his heart opened like it never has before, and that's what I work with him on, opening his heart. So I'm glad that it worked for him, but he had a very interesting thing to say. So I didn't really say what I wanted to say. I wasn't sure I should say it. I ended up talking more about how the open-hearted feeling, what that was like, and I never got to the other point I wanted to make, but I wanted to tell you anyway. That's why I'm coming up to you now, so you hear it. I felt like I dissolved, and I've never had a feeling like that, and it's still with me. And I feel like I'm dissolving. I feel like I'm at 98%, like there's almost nothing left. And I said, you're absolutely right, because clearly his idea was that's the important part, not the part about my heart opened like never before. I just said, you're absolutely right. That's the important part. It's great that your heart opened, and that sounds like it's a permanent opening, and that's wonderful. I'm all for it, and I'm glad that somehow the universe could use me to help that happen in you. But you're absolutely right. It's the dissolving part that matters. It's the dissolving part that's going to take you much higher. It's the dissolving part that's going to finish the job. So that 2%, you're right, that 2% is significant. If it's 98% done, fantastic, how lucky. But that 2% is going to be a bitch. That last holding on is going to be a true barrier. And I think he kind of knew that. That's why he was bringing it up. I was just confirming it for him. And this is the story for all of us. That final 2%, the last bit that we always seem to hold on to, is always what keeps us convinced that we're not there yet, keeps us experiencing a separation that isn't really there, a humanness that isn't any barrier to divinity, though we think it is, and a fear response that's simply normal to the human nervous system, but that we interpret as meaning that something is wrong. In other words, we stay tethered, we stay tied to our human experience that we define in a particular way, and we don't really get it, that the human experience is the divine experience. So anything you let go of, that last 2% is not, you will lose yourself. That's how it feels. That's why that last 2% is the truth for all of us. It's our story. It's the human story for each individual. That last holding on, that last attempt to continue so that we don't lose our bearings, so that we don't feel unmoored. So you absolutely will lose your bearings, and you absolutely will feel unmoored. And the willingness to tolerate that as an experience, as a transition, as a jumping off point, despite the immense intensity of it, despite the terrifying nature of it, despite the disorientation of it, despite the level of panic and anxiety that it invariably induces, and despite the fear being very visceral and cellular and trying to pull us back instead of going forward into the divine, until we absolutely have allowed it. And that's the only way it happens, through an allowing. We can't really say that the truth has reached us. We feel like we're lying if we say that. There's something about human beings that's so pure. It's the divine part, so pure, so right, so beautiful, that we really find it very difficult to lie about the most essential part of truth itself, the most transcendent, the most divine. We can't really feel okay about making up stuff about that. So you would never say that you've reached the absolute truth unless it was true. You'd never say, most of us, that you found your way to God, that it's real, that you aren't just saying words, that you know something of it yourself actually. You would never say that if it wasn't true. And by the same token, and we're not talking about super liars, of course there are people who say anything, we're talking about normal people. There's a vast majority. And by the same token, you hesitate to say what you have already experienced. You hesitate to say to yourself, and certainly more hesitant to say to others, that it's conclusive, it's proof positive. You hesitate to admit to yourself that you already know that God is absolutely, and there's no question, there's nothing to debate, there's nothing to figure out. You know absolutely. You're hesitant to say that because just in case you're not 100% trusting that you're sure, you don't want to take the chance. That's your purity, but it's also your needless hesitation. You should recognize, you should recognize what's already the case for you. You should recognize what you already know for sure, which is absolutely related to that which is eternal and infinite, which is absolutely what you know about the divine itself, which is absolutely your direct knowing about truth itself for real, not something imagined, not dreamy, self-hypnotized. You actually know something for real, but you are not enough willing yet to admit it to yourself. You're not telling yourself the real truth. You're not confident enough that the proof can be offered from your end, that you can actually express it sufficiently that you could defend it to someone else. And yet, you certainly have seen for yourself, you certainly know for yourself, you certainly have experienced for yourself. And until you acknowledge it and recognize it for its deepest meaning, its most sublime actuality, it's the profundity of it itself, you're simply running a race with your legs tied together. You're holding yourself back. And the guru can't untie your legs. The guru can only point out to you that, hey, you might want to think about untying that before you keep running. So this is what's always so amazing, is that you already have so much in your hand, but you conduct yourself as if you were empty-handed. You already have traveled so far, but you always want to present yourself as a beginner. It's just funny. It seems to be just how we are, but it's not necessary. Realization is preceded by recognition. If you want to realize God, if you want to realize truth, if you want to realize yourself, if you want self-realization, it's impossible without sufficient prior recognition. And recognition always includes acknowledgement. To yourself, you don't have to say it to somebody else, you don't have to prove it to anybody, but you have to be able to acknowledge it to yourself. And it's helpful in that process to be able to say it to other like-minded people who would be supportive of hearing it. In a sense, you have to testify in that sense, but to yourself, that the truth is the truth and you know something of it, instead of always conducting yourself as if you know nothing of it, as if you are better off pretending that you're not really where you are. It's kind of like the rich guy who doesn't want anybody to know he's rich because maybe they'll ask for a loan. You know, you're kind of pretending you're not spiritually wealthy yet. You're trying to get there, but you're clearly spiritually wealthy. You wouldn't be listening to me if you weren't. You're the wealthy pretending to be poverty-stricken. And that's why you keep trying everything and going to this and taking that and reading this and listening to that. You're not doing it for fun. You're not doing it because it's your absolute enjoyment. That aspect may be there, but you also have another motive, which is to arrive, to get to God, to know truth, to become enlightened, to become self-realized, whatever term is your particular take on it. And that striving is a kind of a lie, a non-recognition. The lie is you're not recognizing and acknowledging where you already are. And where you already are compared to the conventional average person is night and day. But you're not acknowledging it to yourself. Therefore, you are moving hesitantly forward instead of confidently forward. You are moving carefully toward God instead of full bore. You are inching your way toward absolute truth, not leaping toward absolute truth. And I am trying to get you to leap. I am trying to get you to go full bore. Every aspect of life is trying to get you to do that. Every thing in this universe is a message trying to convince you to get going, to stop holding back, to not hesitate needlessly. There's a time and a place where your hesitancy is appropriate. You're well beyond that. Every single one. I know who's online, I know who's on the phone, and I see who's in the room. And there isn't one person who isn't well beyond that. If there were, I would say it's everybody but that guy. So until you can recognize and acknowledge to yourself the position that you have come to, the position you find yourself in, the spiritual conditions that are there for you at this point, until that's something you are absolutely clear about, confident about, not hesitant about. You cannot, until that, you cannot see the luminousness of every person you encounter. And as a result, you will not see enough your own luminosity. That hesitancy keeps the light away from you. There is a kind of a boldness that's required. There is a kind of a devil-may-care attitude that's required. There is a kind of, I'm willing to stake everything on one bet kind of bravado that's required. And the guru is always creating, no matter who the guru is always creating situations for that to be more supported in you, for that to come out more. But we all start from such a hesitant position. We all stay so hesitant so long, so needlessly. that it becomes a long road. It becomes years and decades instead of weeks and months and a few years. For a few lucky ones, it's a few years. But for most of us, it takes longer. But only because of our own hesitancy, our own reticence to declare to ourselves what we already know to be so. Because, and why? It's not hard to understand. Because then we're done. Then we're committed. Then there's no turning back. Then we've admitted something that we can't take back. You know you can't take it back once you've admitted something on that level. If you can acknowledge the degree to which you actually know truth already, if you can acknowledge the reality that's how much of God is already reality for you, then you really stepped into some real shit. Now there's no going back. You cannot shrink back from that. You can't take that back. You know that. That's why you don't do it. You don't want to be all in. You don't want to have to be committed. You want to keep your options open just in case there's a better way, but there is no better way. That's the irony again. So the guru is always trying to trick you into acknowledging where you really are, admitting it, and then hopefully you'll get bolder. Hopefully you'll get more caught up with where you really are. You'll catch up with yourself. You'll stop playing this game of pretend that you're searching and haven't found anything yet. You've already found so much it's incalculable. But until you acknowledge it, recognize it and acknowledge it for real, it doesn't serve you. It just holds you back. All right, we'll take a short bathroom break. So that's the difference between the disciple and the devotee, is the devotee isn't worried about the last 2%, isn't trying to recover anything or hold on to anything or make anything happen. And as a result, the disciple turns into a devotee. The actual final complete surrender occurs. Devotee just means fully surrendered disciple. The disciple part is over. You're still a disciple. Disciple essentially means lover, connected. But now it's not out of need. Now it's not because you're trying to find something. Now it's not a search anymore. Now it's just the recognition, finally, absolutely, of being a finder, not a seeker. The seeker turns into the finder. That's the only difference between disciple and devotee, but it's the biggest difference imaginable, because it's the difference between striving and being at peace, being content, being fulfilled. And what a difference, obviously. Striving versus content. Trying versus succeeding. So until you are ready, willing, and able to acknowledge and recognize what's already the case for you and stand on it, allow it to become the literal definition and meaning of your life, from this moment on, until it becomes the most important thing itself, that any other definition of you is not in any way associated with you other than that, other than what you already know, what you've already seen, what you already are, what's already irrefutable in you, what you've already experienced, until that is the entire meaning, not just one of the meanings of your life, until that's the cloak you're wrapped in. The true surrender seems unattainable, seems like something far away, and you'd have to change a lot to be capable of it. But it's only because you're not recognizing and acknowledging where you already are. In other words, you're fooling yourself. You're literally fooling yourself. That's the irony. You're fooling yourself. Somehow you're convincing yourself continuously that you are not strong enough yet, not smart enough, not wise enough, not open-hearted enough, not elevated enough, not focused enough, not pure enough, not good enough. Somehow you are laying a judgment on yourself that you do not deserve in any way, shape, or form, rather than acknowledging what's already recognized for real. Again, it can't be overemphasized. Why? Why would you do that? Why do we all do that? Because we don't want to be actually committed to it. Because once you acknowledge it for real, it's so powerful. It's so immense that you can't, and you know this deep down, that you can't not commit yourself to it fully. You can't pretend that the very acknowledgement isn't the commitment itself. Then you're on your way to God, and there's no turning back. Then truth is at your heels, and there's nothing you can do about it. You would like to keep your options open to change your mind. It's really all it is. It's really true. It's a very human thing. It's understandable. You would like to be able to change your mind. You would like to be able to do it different if it turns out your feeling changes. And that's the Achilles heel. That's the spoiler. That's what keeps you striving, stumbling along, instead of just wham, just pulling out the stops and allowing, just really letting it have you. This hesitancy is understandable but deadly. Keeps you going slow, snail's pace, when you could be going rocket ship speed. Gets you to here when you could be out of sight. So this is why no genuine guru ever agrees with your own view of yourself, because your own view of yourself is quite unfair. deluded, seeing yourself as far less than you are. Absolutely shortchanging yourself, selling yourself short. It's like the Olympic champion who sees themselves as barely making the high school track team. It takes a certain kind of guts to stand up and admit that you're an Olympic champion, even after you are. You won the gold medal, but it takes a certain kind of guts to wear it. It takes a certain kind of guts to meet somebody who has never met you and say, yes, I won the gold medal at the Olympics last year. It seems arrogant somehow. It seems egotistical. It seems like we shouldn't be. It seems like bragging. And maybe if you won a gold medal at the Olympics, it is. But spiritually, it isn't the same thing. Spiritually, it isn't bragging. Spiritually, it isn't arrogant. I'm not talking about convincing somebody else. I'm talking about you and how you view yourself. If you won the gold medal at the Olympics for whatever, and you can't acknowledge it to yourself, the meaning of it means you're one of the best runners in the world. If you, let's say you won it in track, so you're one of the best runners, if not the best runner in the world, at least certainly one of them. You're way up there. If you can't recognize that, if winning the gold medal at the Olympics doesn't result in you recognizing that you're a top runner, world level, global level, and you can't acknowledge it to yourself, then yeah, you're going to feel embarrassed if somebody mentions it to somebody else, or you get recognized and somebody says, aren't you that guy who won the gold medal? Yeah, you'll feel like you're being egotistical to say, yeah, I did. You'll say it kind of sheepish, hesitant. Yeah, that's me. You won't say it, proudly or, yep, confidently, unhesitatingly. That's what you're doing. Because you know enough of the divine already. You already know enough about truth. You already have experienced enough of the beyond of what other people, the conventional, ordinary, everyday person who would never be at a meeting like this in a million years knows absolutely nothing about. And in that sense, since we're not saying you're better than that person or they're worse than you. We're just saying it's a different reality. You've had a different take on something, just the way if everyone's blind and one person can see, it doesn't mean that all the people who are blind and the person who can see, that they're not equal. It doesn't mean the sighted person is better than the blind people. It just means they have an advantage. They can see. That's your position. Spiritually, you have an advantage. You have been given a gift, the gift of sight, so to speak. You know there's something real that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily know the way you know it. Because you know it way more for sure. Whatever allowed you to see it, whatever experience, whatever moment, whatever feeling, whatever happened that gives you that position, the point is to recognize it and acknowledge it changes everything. And that's the difference between a disciple and a devotee. A devotee has lost all hesitancy, is so done with pretending that any of this is in any way in question. either because they're so in love with the guru, which is my story, or because of any other set of circumstances that I've talked about over and over that have to do with level of trust, level of faith, level of surrender, level of obedience, level of devotion. Those are the only possibilities, or love. So that none of what's been real for you is any more up for grabs in the slightest way. And there's no guarantee that your stepping away from your hesitancy will cause you to finish the last 2% or whatever it happens to be. But there is a guarantee that if you don't move away from the hesitancy, you will continue to have a sense of striving and stumbling, because that's inevitable for someone who has already won the race and thinks they still need to run. You are simply imagining. It's nothing more than that. You are simply imagining your circumstances rather than acknowledging your truer circumstances. You are going with the conventional approach more than you are with the spiritual reality. So deconditioning addresses this, practice, sadhana addresses this, sangha addresses this, your way of relating to the guru addresses this, but ultimately, either you're going to do it or you're not. Either you're going to recognize your own actual position here and now with no set of excuses attached to it, no trapdoor as a way out in case somebody doesn't like it or disagrees or says, prove it. There's no way out of that commitment that we're all trying to avoid. There's no way. It's part of how it works. It's built in. You don't get to keep all options open. God does not come as part of a set of options. All other options have to be unimportant to you first. All other arguments against commitment have to be set aside because it's too high a price to be not willing to acknowledge and recognize where you've come to out of a hesitancy to feel committed is too high a price to pay. That hesitancy about feeling committed. It's not that you aren't committed. It's the feeling of commitment that you're worried about, that you're unconsciously afraid of, trying to avoid. Because it's not a decision. It's not like when you make a commitment. It's just something that happens. You kind of know this intuitively that there'll be no turning back at that point. At that point, all options close, and there's only where you're going. There's only what's ahead. There's only the spiritual reality and you. And whatever's going to happen between the two is going to happen. You would like to be able to say, yes, as much as I can decide for that, I will. But I'd like to keep a little control over it. And that's the spoiler. You don't get to control it at all. You don't get options, and you don't get to control what happens when you release the false notion of options. None of it gets handled by you. None of it is ultimately up to you. And because you know this intuitively, even sometimes unconsciously, sometimes a little consciously, sometimes very consciously, you would like to avoid the whole business because you know that it means recognizing that you don't get any kind of final vote. You don't get to decide, once all the pieces of the puzzle are put together, what it's a picture of. That you are really out of the game, ultimately, if you yield, if you surrender, if you allow God for real, if you give up the truth for real, you will dissolve. That man's description of his experiences, that's the best, most accurate word. That tells me that he's having a real breakthrough because of that work we did, because nobody uses the word dissolve lightly. It's a serious thing to dissolve. But that's exactly how truth arrives. That's exactly how God arrives. To the degree that you dissolve, what remains is the divine. If you're 50% dissolved, there's 50% more space for the divine. If you're 30% dissolved, there's 30% more opening for truth. And truth immediately rushes in. God immediately fills the space. But the trouble is, it has to be 100% for you to really, really be finished, be done with the striving, be done with the seeking, and be in the position of knowing for real that you're a finder. The seeking is over, the finding has happened. So the true peace, the true fulfillment, the true contentment, the true satisfaction requires that you dissolve at least on enough levels that the space is freed up, that you're not in the way. And all that's in the way is an imaginary you anyway. It's what you think you are. It's what you are conditioned to believe and even to experience. So nothing dissolves that's actual. Nothing dissolves that's real. Only the unreal dissolves. If it's not part of the eternal and the infinite, then it's not real. And if it is part of the eternal and the infinite, there's no way it can dissolve. And you're made of both. You're a composite entity. You have the eternal and the infinite and the divine in you, and you have the unreal in you, the imaginary, the manifestation. It manifests physically, it manifests mentally, it manifests emotionally. It even manifests spiritually, but it's not real. The real spiritual is beyond all that, because it's beyond space and time. Eternal and infinite are what they say. Eternal and infinite, not infinite meaning it's more space than we can imagine, not eternal meaning it's time going on and we can't imagine how far it goes on. The eternal has nothing to do with time. The infinite has nothing to do with space. They don't meet anywhere. Space is not part of infinity, and time is not a little section of eternity. They're not related. Space and time is your human experiencing turned into conceptualization, which then gels it into what you accept as a conventional set of terms, space and time. So whatever culture you come from has its own definition, but whatever that definition is, it's limited and has nothing to do with the reality, because the reality is eternity and the reality is infinity. The reality is not space and time. The experience is space and time. But that's the limited moment that doesn't prevent you from the eternal moment or the infinite part at all. You're just seeing them as it's one or the other. And you would have to be, because until actual true surrender occurs, that division is intrinsic. It's just how we believe. It's just how we perceive. It's a misperception, but of course, when you perceive a misperception, it's your perception. It isn't seen as a misperception. You can conceptually, intellectually get that it's a misperception. You can accept I might be misperceiving, but you will still be experiencing it as your perception, not your misperception. It's only once you're not misperceiving that you see how it was not real. It's only when you are clear that you have found that you actually stop searching. So nobody is suggesting you stop seeking or stop searching. I would never suggest that. I'm all for seeking and searching. I'm just reminding you and informing you that the point isn't seeking, the point is finding. And I'm clarifying for you that you have already found much. You can't get to me unless you've already found much. It hasn't happened yet. That part is more clear than ever, that you can't get to me unless you're already in a very, very, very advantageous position. I don't get true beginners. Even young kids come to me. You saw one the other night. He's no beginner. So I can recognize where you are and I can acknowledge it. But it's going to work way better if you can do that. I have to do that because you can't or won't, but wow, it's going to be really different once you can and do. The other reason it's worth mentioning, it's this whole thing about commitment, that it puts you in a position when you recognize how far you've come and where you really are, and you acknowledge it, it puts you in a position where essentially you can't deny that you're committed, that you're in this for the duration. that commitment becomes kind of sealed. You can't take it back. There's another aspect to it. That you can't really complain anymore. And nobody wants to give up the right to complain. If you really acknowledge, if you really recognize and acknowledge that the divine is perceptible to you, that at least some part of the truth has been revealed to you for real, that you've had some experience, some moment, some seeing, some vision, some knowledge that gives you the actuality that it's real. That when people use the word spiritual, it's referring to something absolutely real. And you know something about it. If that becomes your real position, and I'm saying it needs to, you really don't have much basis left to complain about anything. You really can't pretend that you've been shortchanged in some way. You really can't promulgate a victim trip too much after that point. You kind of are admitting at that point that you've received very great gifts already. And when you have received great gifts, it's not very appropriate to be a complainer. That's not news to anybody. So that's another aspect of it that bears mentioning, because none of us want to give up the right to complain just in case we feel like it at some future point. But there's the irony again. You're holding on to the option of complaining just in case you are not fully satisfied. But the only way to be fully satisfied is by recognizing and acknowledging, and therefore you'll have nothing to complain about. So you're worried about, unconsciously, you don't think about this consciously, you're worried about an impossible situation. When you have real inner peace, when you have absolute fulfillment, when you are completely content, and when you're ready to die, when you're satisfied with life itself, you don't have any need to keep the option of possible future complaint. You're not going to be looking for the complaint department. You're going to be perpetually always recognizing that you've received more than you ever expected. And that's the opposite of complaining. You will feel a really unending gratitude. You'll be willing for anything more than for any other reason because you're so grateful for what's already the case. When you're truly in gratitude, you don't have a lot that comes into your mind in the form of worries. You're not really playing out scenarios in your mind about possible future catastrophes, because it really has ended. That game has ended for you. That whole way of the mind operating is shut down now. You can't play that game anymore. It's like a billionaire pretending he can't afford that, new Lexus. I mean, you're not going to play that game. You're going to see what you can afford, and you're going to enjoy what you want, and you're going to be grateful for the position that you find yourself in, because you know that it's a gift. You know that You didn't cause it and you didn't do anything to deserve it. It's purely a gift. It's a divine gift. You simply allowed yourself to partake of it for real instead of continuing to look for it, hoping someday you'll find it, you'll run across it. Until then, you've got no choice. You have to be in the seeker position because you can't experience what you can't acknowledge. To be able to experience it, you have to be able to recognize it and acknowledge it. So to the degree that you're a finder at this moment already, to the degree that you may have been a finder 30 years ago, to the degree that it's even yet ahead, all of that is simply dependent on your willingness to tell the truth, to be clear with yourself about what's actually the case, what's actually happened, what you actually know and actually don't know, and to be able to acknowledge it rather than think you have to meet a certain standard or it has to be a certain way or look a certain way or sound a certain way or have a certain definition. So all definitions are by definition inaccurate. And that includes all your self-definitions. So I will be very thrilled and happy and glad to keep supporting all of your seeking and all of your searching, and I will help you in your seeker position. That's my job. But I will not collude with you or support you in the notion that you are not yet a finder, because you wouldn't be the kind of seeker you are unless you haven't already found. There's two kinds of seekers, and only two. The ones who find and then start seeking, which is the vast majority of real seekers, and the kind who have some idea about what there is to find and therefore decide to be in the seeking mode, but they haven't found anything and nothing from the beyond has reached to them yet. That's the imaginary seeker. I don't attract imaginary seekers. If you want to meet a lot of imaginary seekers, you can find them at other satsangs with other gurus, other teachers. You won't find them around me. For some reason that I can't account for, God has made sure that only genuine seekers come to me. Maybe it's because I'm hardcore about it. I don't have a lot of tolerance for the fakes. Maybe God knew that I'd be unkind to them. I don't know. I don't know the reason. I just think of it as my genuine luck, my good fortune that I get to have you. So I will continue to work with you and support you in your seeking, but you will never convince me, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much you show your resistance and your refusal and your games and everything else, you will never convince me of something other than the truth. The truth is you've already found tremendously. You already have struck gold. So I will help you in your seeking, but at the same time, I will insist that you more and more recognize the gold mine that you've already laid claim to. I will not allow you to endlessly keep pretending to your own detriment. I will not change my view of you. You will not wear me down into a lazy position of, okay, you're not really standing in the divine, and you don't actually know it. You won't convince me ever that you don't actually know it. The whole reason you're coming to me in the first place is because you know it, and you're looking for somebody to absolutely get you to acknowledge it once and for all. And I intend to win. You will beat me. In the end, you're going to have to give in. You're going to have to see it my way. You aren't going to wear me down. You aren't going to win and convince me that somehow you're not sufficiently aware of the divine and sufficiently capable of standing in truth and of that being your absolute reality. You're never going to talk me into it. You can act as crazy as you want. You can pretend to be stupid all day long. You will not convince me, because I know who sent you and I know why you're here. And I know who you are. And I'm not hesitant, and I'm not worried about commitment. And I will win. You will not be able to play dumb forever. You will not be able to pretend to be confused for as long as you would like to. Even if the game continues beyond my lifetime, if I die and you're still playing the game, in the end, I'm going to win. You will not outlast me, even if you outlive me, which you're likely to do since I'm the oldest one, except for you. Even if you outlive me, you will not outlast me. I am not playing a game here. I'm very serious. I'm very serious about you and your capacity. And I am going to insist more than ever that you give up the nonsense and that you wear the cloak that you've been given, that you are surrounded by the divine, that you are surrounded by truth, that you are no longer willing, that you become no longer willing to tolerate any other environment. I've got a determination that you are not aware of yet. Even the ones who've been with me from day one, 10, 11 years now. You don't even know yet. You don't even know yet how well you know me, and still you don't even know yet the determination that I'm operating from, because the guru function is divine. It's divine determination. You can't deter the divine. Sorry. So I may never say it again, so listen well. I'm going to outlast you. You can live 50 years after I'm dead. I'm going to win. It doesn't end when this body drops. And you will not be able to resist God's actual call, because I'm going to make sure that it's ringing in your ears until you come around. I'm going to dog you like nobody's business. Those of you who are more sensitive and more with me feel how that's going on recently much more, and it's going to be even much more. I am more serious than I've ever been. And only success is an option. We've got a new motto. International Centers of Divine Awakening has a new motto: shape up or shape up.